The people you ignore today may be the ones who remember your kindness tomorrow. Grace Anderson never expected a simple morning routine to change her entire life. She was just another employee inside a large corporate building, someone who arrived early, completed her work, and quietly returned home every evening. She was not the person executives noticed. She was not the person whose name appeared in important meetings. But Grace noticed people others ignored. Every morning at exactly 7:30, before the busy office filled with conversations and footsteps, Grace saw the same man cleaning the quiet hallways. His name was Daniel, or at least that was the name everyone knew him by. He wore a simple uniform, carried cleaning supplies, and moved through the building almost invisible to everyone around him. Most employees walked past without saying a word. Some did not even look up. But Grace always stopped. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" she would ask. At first, the man seemed surprised. He was not used to being noticed. "I am doing fine," he would answer with a small smile. Grace would leave a warm coffee on the small table near the maintenance area and continue with her day. It was never a big gesture. She never expected praise. She never wanted anyone to know. To her, it was simply the right thing to do. Grace had learned that everyone carried a story people could not see. Her own life had taught her that. She knew what it felt like to struggle quietly. She knew what it felt like when people judged someone before understanding them. That was why she treated everyone with respect. Across the city, inside the same building, a man watched everything from a distance. William Carter was not the person most employees thought he was. To them, the company owner was a name on documents and a photograph on the executive floor. A powerful businessman who rarely appeared in public. But after several changes inside the company, William wanted to understand what was really happening. He wanted to know how employees treated people when they thought nobody important was watching. So he made a decision. He stepped away from his usual position and entered the company under a different identity. He wanted to see the truth without titles, without influence, and without people changing their behavior because of his name. Wearing a simple uniform, William became the cleaner everyone overlooked. For days, he walked the same hallways. He watched people rush past each other. He saw employees speak politely to managers but ignore those who worked behind the scenes. Then he noticed Grace. She was different. She did not know his position. She did not know his wealth. She did not know that the person she greeted every morning had the power to change the entire company. She only saw a person. One morning, William arrived earlier than usual. The building was quiet. The lights were still soft, and the empty hallway carried the sound of his footsteps. Grace appeared with a coffee in her hand. "You are here early today," she said with a smile. William looked at her, surprised. "You noticed?" Grace laughed softly. "Of course I noticed. You are here every morning." Those simple words stayed with him. Because in a world where people noticed his money, his company, and his success, this woman noticed him. Not his position, not his reputation. Him. "Thank you," William said quietly. Grace smiled. "For what?" He looked at the coffee in her hand. "For remembering." She simply nodded and continued toward her desk, unaware that her small act of kindness had already created a lasting impression. William stood alone in the hallway, watching her walk away. For the first time in years, he felt something he had not expected. Respect. Not because of what she had achieved, but because of who she was when nobody was watching. And he still had no idea that by Friday, the entire company would discover exactly who the cleaner really was. William Carter had spent years studying numbers, strategies, and business decisions. He knew how to measure success through growth charts, financial reports, and company performance. But after spending several mornings inside his own building disguised as a cleaner, he discovered something no report could reveal. The true character of a company was not found in its executive meetings. It was found in the way people treated those they believed had no power. And every morning, Grace Anderson showed him something he never expected to find. Kindness without an audience. Grace continued her routine without knowing who William really was. She arrived at work early, greeted everyone she passed, and started her day with the same quiet determination. She never changed the way she treated William because she had no reason to. To her, he was simply a person who deserved respect. One morning, William noticed Grace carrying several folders while trying to balance her coffee. Without hesitation, he offered to help. "You do not have to do that," Grace said with a smile. William looked surprised. "Do what?" "Help me. Most people are too busy to notice when someone needs assistance." Her words stayed with him. Because she was right. The building was filled with people every day. Thousands of conversations. Hundreds of interactions. Yet so many people move through the world without truly seeing each other. William had spent years wondering why employees felt disconnected from the company. Now he was beginning to understand. The problem was not only about policies or management. It was about people forgetting how to care. Later that day, William watched from a distance as Grace helped another employee who was struggling with a heavy box. She did not know anyone was watching. She did not do it for recognition. She simply helped because she saw someone who needed support. That was when William realized something important. Grace's kindness was not an act. It was who she was. Meanwhile, Grace had no idea that the person she spoke with every morning was someone with incredible influence. She continued treating William exactly the same way she treated everyone else. She asked about his day. She remembered small details. She noticed when he seemed tired. One morning, she handed him a coffee and said, "You look like you did not get enough rest." William smiled. "You can tell." Grace nodded. Everyone needs someone to notice sometimes. The sentence stayed with him throughout the day. Because for a man surrounded by employees, advisors, and business partners, it was surprising how rare it was for someone to simply ask if he was okay. Inside his private office later that afternoon, William looked at the reports about his company culture. The numbers showed productivity. The reports showed efficiency. But they did not show the moments he had witnessed. They did not show Grace stopping to help someone. They did not show employees ignoring people they considered less important. They did not show the difference between a workplace that functioned and a workplace where people cared. William knew he had found something valuable. Not a business strategy. Not a financial opportunity. A person who represented the values he wanted his company to have. But he still needed to understand more. Was Grace kind because she believed someone important was watching? Or was she kind because that was simply who she was? So he continued his quiet observation. He changed his routine. He appeared in different areas of the building. He watched conversations. He listened. And every time, Grace remained the same. She treated everyone equally. She greeted the security guard. She thanked the maintenance staff. She spoke respectfully to executives and employees alike. To Grace, a person's title did not determine their worth. Their humanity did. By Thursday afternoon, William made his decision. He had seen enough. He finally understood the kind of person he wanted representing his company. But before revealing his identity, he wanted to give Grace one more chance to prove something. Not to him, to the entire company. Because on Friday, everyone would discover who the cleaner really was. And Grace would finally learn that the man she helped every morning was not just another employee walking through the halls. William Carter continued his quiet observation of the company, but after several days, something became clear. The building was full of talented people, employees with impressive resumes, managers with years of experience, executives with strong opinions. Yet the person who stood out the most was someone almost everyone overlooked. Grace Anderson. She was not the highest-ranking employee. She did not have a private office. She was not someone who attended important meetings. But every morning, she showed the same respect to everyone around her. William had spent years searching for ways to improve his company. He invested in technology. He hired experts. He studied market trends. But he had never considered that the most important change might begin with something much simpler. The way people treated each other. One morning, William arrived earlier than usual. The office was quiet, with only the sound of cleaning carts moving through the empty halls. He watched Grace approach the maintenance area with 2 coffees in her hands. One was for herself. The other was for him. "I thought you might need this today," she said. William looked at the cup and smiled. "How did you know?" Grace shrugged gently. "You looked tired yesterday." He was surprised. Most people noticed his position, his expensive suit, his authority. They rarely noticed him as a person. "You pay attention to everything," William said. Grace smiled. "I think people deserve to be noticed." Those words followed him all day, because that was exactly what his company had been missing. People were being measured by their positions instead of their humanity. Later, William walked through different departments while continuing his role as a cleaner. He watched employees interact when they thought nobody important was nearby. Some were polite. Some were distant. Some ignored anyone they believed could not help their career. But Grace remained the same everywhere. She thanked the cafeteria workers. She greeted the security team. She stopped to help a new employee who looked confused about where to go. She treated everyone with the same kindness. William began to understand why she was different. Grace did not know who he was. She had no reason to impress him. There was no promotion she could gain, no advantage she could receive. Her actions came from something deeper. That evening, William returned to his private office for the first time in days. He removed the simple uniform and looked at his reflection in the mirror. He was the owner of the company, the person everyone wanted to impress. Yet the person who taught him the most was someone who did not even know his name. He opened a report about employee culture. The numbers looked acceptable. Productivity was stable. Profits were strong. But William knew numbers could not tell the whole story. They could not show whether people felt respected. They could not measure kindness. They could not reveal character. The next morning, William returned to the building wearing the same uniform. He wanted one final day to observe before making a decision. When he arrived, Grace was already there. She smiled when she saw him. "Good morning. You are early again." William nodded. "So are you." She laughed softly. "Someone has to make sure the day starts well." He looked at her for a moment. "Why do you do this?" Grace looked confused. "Do what?" "Help people. Notice people. Even when nobody asks you to." She thought about the question. "Because I know what it feels like when people forget you are there." William became quiet. Her answer revealed something deeper. Grace was not kind because life had always been easy for her. She was kind because she understood what it meant to need kindness. That was the moment William made his final decision. He no longer needed to test her character. He already knew the truth. Grace Anderson was exactly the kind of person he wanted representing his company. Not because she had the most impressive title, not because she had the most influence, but because she had something far more valuable: integrity. As Friday approached, William prepared everything for the announcement. The entire company would gather for a major meeting. Employees expected another corporate update, another business presentation. They had no idea that the quiet cleaner walking through their halls was about to reveal his true identity. And Grace had no idea that the person she helped every morning was about to change her life forever. By Thursday evening, William Carter knew he had discovered something rare. In a world where people often changed their behavior based on who was watching, Grace Anderson remained exactly the same whether anyone noticed or not. She treated the cleaner in the hallway with the same respect she showed executives in expensive suits. She offered kindness without expecting anything in return. And that was what made her different. William had spent most of his career surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Opportunities, connections, approval. But Grace wanted nothing. She did not know his name. She did not know his position. She did not know that the man she greeted every morning had the ability to change the future of the entire company. She simply saw another person. As Friday approached, William prepared for the announcement that would reveal everything. But before that moment arrived, he wanted to understand one final thing. He wanted to know how Grace handled pressure, how she responded when things did not go according to plan. So he created one final situation, a small test, not to trick her, not to embarrass her, but to see whether her kindness remained when circumstances became difficult. Friday morning began like any other day. Employees walked through the lobby carrying coffee and discussing meetings. Phones rang. Elevators opened and closed. The building moved with its usual rhythm. Grace arrived early as always. She greeted the security guard by name. She thanked the receptionist for helping her with a package. Then she walked toward the maintenance area where William was waiting. "Good morning," she said with the same warm smile. William looked at her. "Good morning, Grace." She noticed something immediately. "You seem different today." He smiled slightly. "Different how?" "Like you have something on your mind." William was surprised. Again, she noticed. "Maybe I do," he answered. Grace placed the coffee beside him. "Whatever it is, I hope it gets better." It was a simple sentence. But William realized that was exactly who she was. She cared before she knew the details. She supported before she knew the outcome. Later that morning, a company-wide meeting was announced. Everyone gathered in the main conference room. Employees expected a regular update from leadership. Some discussed quarterly results. Others wondered what new changes would be announced. Grace entered quietly and sat among other employees. She had no idea why everyone had been called together. William stood backstage for a moment, looking at the crowd. He thought about the past week. He thought about the mornings when Grace treated him like a person instead of a position. He thought about how easily people ignored someone wearing a simple uniform. Then he walked onto the stage. The room became silent. Many employees recognized him immediately. The The CEO, the owner, the person whose name was on every important document in the company. Grace looked confused. She looked from William to the stage, trying to understand what was happening. William spoke calmly. For the past week, I have walked through this building without my title. Everyone listened carefully. I wanted to see what our company looked like when nobody knew who was watching. The room became quiet. William continued. I saw many things. I saw hardworking people. I saw dedication. But I also saw something else. I saw how easy it is to forget the people who do not have power. His eyes moved toward Grace. She looked surprised. But I also saw someone who never forgot. William explained how Grace treated him every morning. How she offered kindness without knowing his identity. How she respected everyone equally. The room remained silent. Some employees looked uncomfortable as they remembered moments when they had walked past people without saying a word. William turned toward Grace. Grace Anderson represents the kind of person this company should value. She looked overwhelmed. She had never expected attention. She had never helped anyone to receive recognition. William continued. True leadership is not only about making decisions. It is about understanding people. After the meeting, many employees approached Grace. Some apologized for times they had overlooked others. Some thanked her for reminding them of something important. Grace accepted every word with the same humility she always carried. Later, William found her standing near the window overlooking the city. I never wanted a reward, she said quietly. William smiled. That is exactly why you deserved one. She looked at him. You changed everything. William shook his head. No, Grace. You reminded everyone what should have been there all along. And in that moment, she understood something. The cleaner she helped every morning was never invisible. He was simply waiting for someone to see the person behind the uniform. And William Carter realized the greatest value in his company had never been found in numbers or profits. It was found in people like Grace who chose kindness when nobody was watching. After the company-wide announcement, Grace Anderson became the person everyone wanted to understand. Some employees admired her. Some felt embarrassed that they had overlooked someone so kind for so long. But Grace remained exactly the same. She did not suddenly act important. She did not change the way she spoke to people. She continued arriving early, greeting everyone, and treating every person with the same respect she had shown before. That was what impressed William Carter the most. Many people changed when they discovered they were being noticed. Grace changed nothing because she had never been pretending. Her kindness had never been a performance. It was simply who she was. In the days following the announcement, William invited Grace to a private meeting. She entered his office carefully, still feeling uncertain about why the owner of the company wanted to speak with her. She had spent her entire career staying out of attention. Now she was sitting across from the person who had been watching her actions all along. I hope you do not think I was trying to test you unfairly, William said. Grace looked surprised. I do not. He smiled slightly. Most people would be upset. Grace thought for a moment. I think everyone has their own reasons for how they act. William appreciated that answer. She was not angry. She was not trying to criticize others. She simply understood people. That is exactly why I wanted to meet you, he said. This company needs more people who see others as people first. Grace looked down. I was only doing what felt right. William nodded. And that is what made it meaningful. He explained that he wanted to create a new initiative focused on improving the company culture. He wanted employees at every level to feel respected. He wanted kindness and teamwork to become part of the company's identity. And he wanted Grace involved. The offer surprised her. She had expected appreciation. Maybe a thank you. She never expected a new opportunity. I do not have the experience some of the executives have, Grace said honestly. William smiled. That is not what I am looking for. Then what are you looking for? He answered simply. Character. Those words stayed with Grace. Because for years, she believed success was measured by titles and achievements. But William saw something different. He saw value in the qualities people often ignored. Patience, compassion, integrity. Meanwhile, the rest of the company began changing too. Employees started greeting the maintenance staff. Managers began listening more carefully. People who once walked past each other started having real conversations. It was not a perfect transformation overnight, but it was a beginning. William watched the changes with satisfaction. He had spent years building the company financially. Now he was finally building its heart. One afternoon, Grace walked through the office and saw William speaking with employees without any sense of distance. She smiled because she noticed something. The man who had hidden his identity to observe others had also learned something about himself. He had discovered that leadership was not about standing above people. It was about understanding them. Later that day, William thanked Grace again. "You know," he said, "when I started this, I thought I was looking for information about my company." Grace smiled. "And what did you find?" He looked around the office. "I found the reason it should become better." Grace nodded. She never expected that a small morning routine would create such a large impact. She never expected that offering a coffee or saying hello could reach someone with the power to change thousands of lives. But that was the quiet power of kindness. It did not need attention to matter. It did not need recognition to be valuable. It simply needed someone willing to choose it. William once believed the most important assets in a company were numbers, ideas, and resources. But after meeting Grace, he understood something much deeper. The greatest strength of any organization was the people who chose to care when nobody was watching. And Grace Anderson had proven that one small act of kindness could travel farther than anyone imagined. After the announcement that revealed William Carter's true identity, Grace Anderson expected her life to return to normal. She thought the attention would fade. She thought the company would move on to the next important matter. But something unexpected happened. The small act of kindness that had once gone unnoticed became the beginning of a much larger change. William did not want Grace to become a symbol for one day. He wanted her values to become part of the company's future. He invited her to join a new initiative focused on improving the workplace culture. At first, Grace was unsure. She had never imagined herself sitting in meetings with executives or sharing ideas with people who had years of corporate experience. "I'm not sure I belong in that room," she admitted. William looked at her calmly. "That is exactly why you should be there." Grace looked confused. "Why?" He smiled. "Because too many people in that room already know how business works. We need someone who remembers how people work." His words stayed with her. For years, Grace believed success belonged to people with impressive titles and powerful connections. She never considered that compassion could also be a valuable skill. But William saw something different. He saw leadership in the way she treated people. He saw strength in her humility. As Grace joined the initiative, she began sharing simple ideas. Not complicated strategies. Not expensive solutions. Just reminders that people wanted to feel respected. She suggested recognizing employees who worked behind the scenes. She encouraged managers to listen more. She wanted everyone, regardless of position, to feel like they mattered. Some executives were skeptical at first. They wondered if these small changes could really impact a large company. But William supported her completely. "The biggest changes often begin with small choices," he told them. Slowly, the atmosphere inside the company started changing. Employees who once walked past each other began saying hello. Teams started communicating better. Managers became more aware of how their actions affected others. The building felt different. It was still a place of business, but it became a place where people felt valued. Grace noticed the changes, but never took credit for them. When people thanked her, she always responded the same way. Everyone just needed to remember what was important. William admired that about her. He had met many talented people throughout his career. People who were intelligent, ambitious, and successful. But Grace reminded him that character was something different. It could not be taught through a presentation. It could not be measured in a report. It was revealed through choices made when nobody was watching. One afternoon, William and Grace stood near the large windows overlooking the city. The same place where he once stood alone thinking about his company's future. "Do you ever regret helping me?" William asked. Grace looked surprised. "Of course not." He smiled. "Even after everything changed?" She shook her head. "I did not help you because you own the company. I helped you because you were a person." That answer meant more to William than she realized. Because it reminded him of the lesson he had almost forgotten. Titles could open doors. Money could create opportunities. But kindness was what connected people. Months earlier, William entered his own company wearing a simple uniform because he wanted to understand the truth. He discovered something far more valuable than information. He discovered a person who represented everything he wanted the company to become. Grace Anderson never expected her morning routine to change an entire organization. She never expected a simple cup of coffee and a kind word to reach the most powerful person in the building. But kindness often works that way. It starts quietly. It grows slowly. And sometimes, when the right person sees it, it changes everything. After months of change inside the company, William Carter realized something important. Creating a better workplace was not about one announcement or one new program. It was about changing the way people saw each other every day. And Grace Anderson continued to be the example that reminded everyone what true leadership looked like. Grace never asked for attention. She never looked for praise. Even after becoming known throughout the company, she still arrived early, greeted the same people, and offered the same kindness she always had. Some employees expected her to change after receiving recognition from the owner. They expected confidence to become arrogance. But Grace remained humble. That was exactly why William trusted her. One afternoon, William invited Grace to a leadership meeting with several department managers. She walked into the room feeling nervous. Everyone there had more experience with corporate decisions than she did. She held a simple notebook in her hands and quietly took her seat. "I do not think I am the person you expected to see here," Grace admitted. William smiled. "That is why you are the right person to be here." The managers listened as William explained the purpose of the meeting. The company was not only focused on improving performance. It was focused on improving the way people worked together. He asked Grace to share what she had noticed during her time in the building. At first, she hesitated. She did not want to criticize anyone. She did not want to make people feel judged. "I think people want to feel valued," she finally said. "Not just for what they do, but because they matter." The room became quiet. Her words were simple, but they carried something many business discussions lacked: truth. She explained that small actions could change the atmosphere of an entire workplace. Saying hello, showing appreciation, listening before making assumptions, treating every person with respect regardless of their position. William watched the managers carefully. He could see that Grace was teaching them something no training program could fully explain. During the following weeks, Grace continued helping shape the company's new culture. She worked with different teams. She listened to employees. She collected stories about challenges people faced at work. She never acted like she knew everything. Instead, she asked questions. That quality impressed William the most. Many leaders wanted to be heard. Grace wanted to understand. One morning, William walked through the office and saw something he never expected. A group of executives were speaking with members of the maintenance team. They were not discussing work orders or schedules. They were simply having a conversation, something that would have rarely happened before. William smiled because he knew the change was real. It was not forced. It was growing naturally. Later that day, Grace and William stood near the same hallway where their story began. "Do you ever think about that first morning?" William asked. Grace smiled. "When I brought you coffee?" He nodded. "Yes." She laughed softly. "I had no idea who you were." "That was the best part," William said. Grace looked at him. "Why?" He answered honestly. "Because you treated me like a person before you knew my title." Those words meant everything. Because William had spent years surrounded by people who reacted to his position. Grace reacted to his humanity. "You changed more than this company," William said. "You changed the way I see leadership." Grace shook her head. "I did not do anything special." William smiled. "That is exactly what makes it special." As the sun began setting outside the office windows, Grace looked around the building. A place that once felt cold and distant now felt different. Not because the walls changed. Not because the company became less ambitious. It changed because people remembered something important. Every person walking through those doors had a story. Every person deserved respect. And William Carter finally understood the lesson that Grace had shown him from the beginning. The strongest companies are not built only by talented minds. They are built by people with good hearts. The transformation inside the company continued, but William Carter knew the most important changes were not the ones people could see immediately. New policies could be written. New programs could be announced. But changing the way people treated each other required something deeper. It required people to believe that kindness was not a weakness. It was a strength. And Grace Anderson became the person who quietly proved that every day. Grace never acted like she was better than anyone else after receiving recognition. She still walked through the same hallways. She still greeted the same employees. She still thanked the same people who helped keep the company running. William noticed that more than anything, some people gained attention and changed because of it. Grace gained attention and stayed exactly the same. That was why people trusted her. One afternoon, William asked Grace to join him for a visit to different departments. He wanted her to see the impact of the changes she helped create. As they walked through the building, Grace noticed things she had never seen before. Employees were stopping to talk. Managers were listening more carefully. People who once seemed separated by job titles were beginning to connect. "This feels different," Grace said quietly. William smiled. "It is." She looked around. "I did not expect a few simple ideas to make such a difference." William looked at her. "That is because you still see them as simple." Grace tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" "Respect feels simple to the person giving it," William explained. "But to the person receiving it, it can mean everything." Those words stayed with Grace. Because that was exactly why she had always acted the way she did. She knew small moments mattered. A greeting. A thank you. A few seconds spent making someone feel noticed. Later that week, William invited Grace to a company leadership event. This time, she stood on the same stage where executives usually spoke. She looked out at the crowd and felt nervous. She was not used to being the center of attention. William introduced her with a few simple words. "Grace represents the values we want this company to have." Grace stepped forward and shared a message that was not complicated. "Everyone here contributes something important," she said. "A company is not only built by the people whose names appear on documents. It is built by everyone who shows up every day and gives their best." The room listened quietly. Her words were not about business strategies or financial goals. They were about people, and that was exactly why they mattered. After the event, several employees approached Grace. Some told her they had started treating others differently because of her example. Some shared stories about moments when they felt invisible and how much a simple kindness meant. Grace listened to every person with the same attention she had always given. William watched from a distance and smiled. He realized something important. Grace had never tried to become a leader. She became one because people naturally followed someone who cared. That evening, William and Grace stood near the office windows as the city lights appeared below them. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you walked past me that morning?" William asked. Grace smiled. "Probably nothing would have changed." He shook his head. "I think everything would have changed." She looked at him. William continued. "I spent years trying to understand what makes a company successful. I looked at numbers. I looked at strategies. I looked at competition." He paused. "But I never looked closely enough at the people." Grace smiled softly. "Maybe you just needed someone to remind you." William nodded. "Maybe I did." The building around them was no longer the same place where employees rushed past each other without noticing. It had become a place where people remembered they were connected. And it all started with one person choosing kindness when nobody was watching. Grace Anderson never expected a simple morning greeting to change an entire company. She never expected a cup of coffee to reach the owner of the building. But that was the power of genuine kindness. It did not need a title. It did not need recognition. It only needed a person willing to give it. And William Carter learned the lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The greatest leaders are not the ones who stand above others. They are the ones who never forget to see them. The morning light slipped through the airplane window, painting soft golden lines across the quiet cabin as Claire slowly opened her eyes. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. She only remembered the rare feeling she had carried into sleep. Peace. Not the kind that came from having no problems, but the kind that appeared when someone finally reminded her she did not have to face every problem alone. Beside her, Liam was still asleep, his small hand resting on the paper airplane he had folded during the flight. The little creation was slightly bent, one corner damaged from countless landings on the tray table, but he held it like it was something precious. Claire smiled softly. She knew that feeling. Sometimes the smallest things became the biggest treasures when life had taken so much away. Across the aisle, the stranger who had helped them during the difficult moments of the flight glanced over with a quiet smile. He did not interrupt. He simply watched as mother and son shared a peaceful moment that seemed impossible only hours earlier. Claire noticed him and gave a grateful nod. "Thank you again," she whispered. "For everything." The man looked slightly uncomfortable receiving gratitude. "You do not have to thank me. You were already doing the hardest part." Claire looked confused. "What do you mean?" He glanced at Liam. "You kept showing up for him, even when you were exhausted. A lot of people underestimate how much strength that takes." The words stayed with her. She had heard advice before. She had heard opinions. She had heard people tell her what she should have done differently. But this was different. He was not judging her. He was simply seeing her. When the plane finally landed at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the cabin filled with the familiar sounds of passengers gathering their bags and preparing to leave. Claire adjusted Liam's jacket, checked his backpack, and carefully made sure the paper airplane was safe. "Ready?" she asked. Liam nodded proudly. "Ready." As they walked toward the exit, Claire expected the stranger to disappear into the crowd like everyone else. She had learned that kindness was often brief. A moment, a memory, something beautiful that passed before real life returned. But when she reached the terminal, she noticed something unexpected. Several people stopped to greet the man. Airport employees smiled. A security officer shook his hand. A business associate approached quickly, saying, "Mr. Carter, your team has been trying to reach you." Claire froze for a moment. Mr. Carter. The name sounded familiar. She turned slightly and saw the confidence in the way people looked at him. Not because he demanded attention, because he naturally carried responsibility. The simple clothes could not hide the respect surrounding him. Her eyes moved to the expensive watch he had covered beneath his sleeve earlier, the calm voice, the careful way he listened. Suddenly, pieces began connecting. The man who had sat beside her in economy class was not an ordinary traveler. He was someone whose name appeared in business magazines. Someone whose company was known across the country. A billionaire CEO. But he had not acted like one. He had acted like a person. Claire quickly looked away, feeling embarrassed. She had shared her worries with a stranger. She had accepted his kindness without knowing who he was. But when she started walking away, his voice stopped her. "Claire." She turned around in surprise. "How do you know my name?" He smiled gently. "You told me on the plane." She realized she had forgotten. Exhaustion had made the entire night feel unreal. "I hope you and Liam have a safe journey home," he said. Claire nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." For the first time, she used his name. His expression changed slightly, almost as if he missed the simplicity of being treated like just another person. "Actually," he said softly, "I preferred when you just called me a stranger." Claire smiled. Maybe because strangers are sometimes the ones who remind us that kindness still exists. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the airport continued moving. Suitcases rolled across the floor. Announcements echoed overhead. Thousands of lives crossed paths without noticing each other. But some meetings were different. Some moments arrived quietly, carrying a message people needed exactly when they needed it. As Claire walked away with Liam holding her hand, she looked back once. The man who had everything money could buy stood alone for a moment in the middle of the crowd. And somehow, she knew he had received something from their meeting too. Something money had never been able to purchase. A reminder of what it meant to truly care. Because sometimes the person who needs saving is not the one struggling to survive. Sometimes it is the person who forgot why survival mattered. The afternoon sun followed Claire and Liam as they stepped out of the busy airport terminal and into the cool Chicago air. The city moved around them with its usual rhythm. Cars passed along the road. Travelers hurried toward waiting rides. Voices blended together beneath the sound of rolling luggage and distant announcements. Yet Claire felt strangely different. For the first time in a long while, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. Liam held her hand tightly, swinging the small paper airplane in his other hand. "Mom," he said with a curious expression, "was that man a superhero?" Claire looked down at him and smiled. "Why do you think that?" Liam looked serious as only children could. "Because he helped everyone. And he did not want anyone to know he was special." Claire looked back toward the airport entrance where Daniel Carter had disappeared into the crowd. She thought about that. The world often noticed people because of their money, their titles, or their achievements. But Liam had noticed something different. He had noticed kindness. That evening, back at their small apartment on the edge of the city, Claire placed Liam's paper airplane on the kitchen shelf. The apartment was simple. The paint near the window needed refreshing. The old couch had a small tear on one side. But it was home. She prepared dinner while Liam colored at the table, occasionally looking up to tell her about the flight again. "He knew how to make the airplane fly farther," Liam said proudly. "Maybe he is really a superhero." Claire laughed softly. "Maybe he just knows that small things matter." After Liam went to sleep, Claire sat alone at the kitchen table. The quiet of the apartment returned. The same quiet that used to feel heavy now felt different. She opened her laptop and looked at the job applications she had been sending for months. Her resume was good. Her experience was real. But every rejection had slowly convinced her that maybe she was asking for too much. Maybe a better life was something meant for other people. Then she remembered Daniel's words. You kept showing up for him, even when you were exhausted. A small smile appeared on her face. The next morning, Claire woke before her alarm. She made Liam breakfast, packed his backpack, and walked him to school. The ordinary routine felt almost new. At the corner near the school entrance, she noticed something unusual. A black sedan was parked nearby. She recognized the driver stepping out. It was one of the people who had greeted Daniel at the airport. Claire stopped walking. The man approached politely. Excuse me, are you Claire Morgan? Her expression became cautious. Yes. He handed her a small envelope. Mr. Carter asked me to give this to you. Claire looked at the envelope but did not open it. Why? The man smiled slightly. Because he believes people should not lose opportunities simply because life became difficult for a while. After he left, Claire stood there holding the envelope, unsure what to feel. She had spent years learning how to survive without expecting anything from anyone. Accepting help had always felt like admitting defeat. But something about Daniel was different. He had never looked at her like someone broken. He had looked at her like someone capable. Later that day, after Liam came home from school, Claire finally opened the envelope. Inside was not money. It was not a gift card or a promise of an easy life. It was a letter recommending her for an interview at Carter Foundation, a company that supported parents returning to the workforce. At the bottom was a handwritten note. I hope someone gives you the same chance you have given your son every day. Everyone deserves one person who believes in them. Claire read the sentence twice. Then she quietly placed the letter against her chest. She did not cry because someone had rescued her. She cried because someone had reminded her that she was worth believing in. The next week, Claire walked into the Carter Foundation offices wearing the best professional outfit she owned. It was not expensive. It was not designer. But she wore it with confidence she had not felt in years. The building was tall and modern, with glass walls reflecting the morning sunlight. She expected to feel out of place. Instead, she remembered the airplane. She remembered the stranger who sat beside her, without caring about the difference between their worlds. During the interview, the hiring manager asked her a simple question. Why should we choose you? Claire paused. In the past, she would have answered with an apology. She would have explained the gaps in her career. She would have focused on what she lacked. But this time, she answered differently. Because I know how to keep going when things are difficult. And I know how much one opportunity can change a life. Outside the office window, Daniel Carter stood quietly for a moment after hearing the answer from his assistant. He smiled. He had built companies. He had created opportunities. He had changed numbers on financial reports. But that day, he witnessed something more meaningful. He watched someone who had almost forgotten her own strength begin to see it again. Sometimes kindness does not change a person's life by giving them everything. Sometimes it changes a life by reminding someone they already had the courage to begin again. The days after the interview moved slowly, but for Claire, they carried a feeling she had almost forgotten. Possibility. Every morning, she woke up before Liam, prepared his breakfast, packed his backpack, and looked at herself in the mirror with a little more confidence than the day before. Nothing about her life had changed overnight. The apartment was still small. The bills still waited on the kitchen counter. The laundry machine still made a strange sound every time it started. But something inside her had changed. She no longer looked at her struggles as proof that she had failed. She saw them as proof that she had endured. A week after her interview, Claire received the call she had been hoping for. The Carter Foundation wanted to offer her a position as a community program coordinator. It was not a glamorous title. It was not a job that would place her name on a magazine cover. But it was meaningful work. Work where her experience as a mother, her patience, and her understanding of hardship were not weaknesses. They were strengths. When Claire hung up the phone, she sat quietly for a moment. Liam was drawing at the table, his paper airplane sitting beside his crayons. Mom, he asked, are you okay? Claire looked at him and smiled through the emotion she was trying to hold back. Yes, sweetheart. I think we are going to be okay. Liam smiled like he already knew that. Children often sensed hope before adults allowed themselves to believe in it. On her first day at the Carter Foundation, Claire arrived early. The building was bright and welcoming, filled with people who carried the same purpose. They were not there just to manage numbers or complete reports. They were there because every file represented a person. Every appointment represented a family. Every opportunity represented a new beginning. Claire quickly learned that Daniel Carter was respected not only because he was successful, but because people remembered how he treated them. Employees spoke about how he visited community centers without cameras, how he listened before making decisions, how he remembered names even in rooms filled with hundreds of people. One afternoon, Claire was organizing documents when Daniel walked past her office. She immediately stood. "Mr. Carter." He smiled. "Claire, you do not have to stand every time you see me." She laughed softly. "I am still getting used to working here." Daniel looked around her office. A small photo of Liam sat beside her computer. A paper airplane drawing was taped near the corner of her desk. "You brought a little piece of home with you." Claire looked at the drawing. "Liam says it reminds him that things can fly even when they start as just a piece of paper." Daniel smiled. "That is a wise kid." For a moment, they stood quietly. The noise of the office continued around them. Phones rang. People walked through the hallway. Printers hummed in the background. But the moment felt strangely calm. "I wanted to thank you," Claire said. Daniel shook his head. "For what?" "For seeing me when most people only saw my problems." His expression softened. "Claire, I did not create your strength. I only noticed it." Those words stayed with her. Because for years, she had waited for someone to give her permission to believe in herself. She had forgotten that the person she needed to believe in was already there. A few months passed. Claire became one of the most trusted members of the foundation team. She helped families find resources. She spoke with parents who felt invisible. She understood their fears because she had lived them. One evening, after a long day, she and Liam walked through a small park near their apartment. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold. Liam flew his paper airplane across the open field, laughing as it landed farther than before. Claire watched him run and felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Not because life had become perfect. It never would. But because she had learned something important. Sometimes a person does not need someone to carry them forever. Sometimes they only need someone to remind them they are strong enough to keep walking. Across the city, Daniel stood in his office looking out over the lights below. The same city he had spent years trying to conquer. The same city where he once believed success was measured by what he owned. Now he understood something different. The most valuable moments were not found in boardrooms or financial reports. They were found in small acts of kindness that changed the direction of someone's life. And somewhere in that city, a mother who once felt forgotten was teaching her son that hope could return. Because sometimes the greatest gift one person can give another is not a solution. It is the simple reminder that they were never invisible. The first snow of the season arrived quietly over Chicago, covering the sidewalks with a thin layer of white that reflected the city lights like tiny mirrors. Claire stood by the kitchen window holding a warm cup of coffee, watching people hurry through the cold morning. Months earlier, she would have looked at scenes like this and felt like she was standing outside of everyone else's lives. Now, she felt something different. She felt present. Her apartment was still the same. The walls still carried the marks of years of simple living. The furniture was still chosen because it was affordable, not because it was beautiful. But the space felt warmer because it was filled with something money could not buy. Peace. Liam ran into the kitchen wearing his winter jacket half-zipped, his hair still messy from sleep. "Mom, I cannot find my paper airplane." Claire smiled. "Check your backpack." He quickly opened it and pulled out the folded paper creation with excitement. "I knew it was there." Claire watched him carefully. That little airplane had become more than a toy. It was a reminder of the day everything began to change. A reminder that one unexpected moment of kindness could create a path no one saw coming. Later that morning, Claire arrived at the Carter Foundation earlier than usual. She had learned that small acts mattered. A message answered quickly. A family greeted warmly. A person listened instead of rushing away. Those things seemed simple, but she knew how much they could mean. During a team meeting, Claire presented a new idea for the foundation. She wanted to create a program specifically for single parents returning to work after difficult periods in their lives. The room became quiet as she explained her vision. "Many people do not need someone to fix everything for them," Claire said. "They need someone to see their potential before they can see it themselves." Across the table, several team members nodded. The words came from experience, not theory. After the meeting, Daniel approached her office door. "That was a strong presentation." Claire looked surprised. "Thank you. I was nervous." Daniel smiled. "You should be. Good ideas usually come from people who care enough to worry about getting them right." Claire laughed softly. "You always make things sound simple." Daniel looked toward the hallway where employees were walking by. The important things usually are. For a moment, Claire noticed something she had not before. Daniel was successful, respected, and surrounded by people every day. Yet there were moments when he looked almost as lonely as she had once felt. She remembered the man on the airplane. The man who had everything but still seemed grateful for a simple conversation. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said. "Of course. Why did you sit in economy class that day?" Daniel smiled slightly, remembering. "Because sometimes I think people tell you more when they do not know who you are." Claire understood immediately. Without his title, without his wealth, without anyone trying to impress him, he had seen people as they really were. "Did you learn anything?" she asked. Daniel looked out the window at the snowy city. "Yes." His voice became softer. "I learned that there are people fighting battles quietly every day. And most of them do not need sympathy. They need respect." Claire looked down, remembering all the times she had felt invisible. The strangers who looked away. The people who judged without knowing her story. But she also remembered the person who stopped and helped. The person who reminded her that kindness still existed. A few weeks later, Claire's program officially launched. The first group of parents walked into the foundation with the same uncertainty she once carried. They looked nervous. They apologized too much. They underestimated themselves. Claire recognized every feeling because she had lived every one of them. During the first session, a young mother raised her hand. "What if I am too far behind?" she asked. Claire paused. She could have given a professional answer. She could have quoted statistics. Instead, she shared the truth. "I used to think being behind meant my story was over. I was wrong. Sometimes being delayed just means you are still on your way." The room became quiet. Then slowly, people began to smile. That evening, Claire walked home with Liam. Snowflakes landed on his blue jacket as he held her hand. "Mom," he said, "do you think the airplane will fly again?" She looked at the small paper airplane in his hand. "I think it already did." Liam tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Claire smiled. "Sometimes something small starts moving, and you do not realize how far it will travel." As they continued walking through the snowy streets, Claire looked up at the lights shining above them. She thought about the stranger who changed her path. She thought about the journey that followed. And she finally understood something she wished she had known sooner. A person's life is not defined by the hardest chapter they survive. It is defined by the courage they find afterward. 1 year after the day she met Daniel Carter on that airplane, Claire stood in the same small kitchen where she had once counted every dollar before buying groceries. The morning sunlight entered through the window, touching the wooden table where Liam had drawn his first paper airplane. The apartment had changed slightly. There were new curtains. A few framed pictures covered the walls. A small plant sat near the window because Liam insisted the room needed something green. But the most important change was not something anyone could see. It was the feeling inside the home. It was no longer a place where Claire simply survived. It was a place where she dreamed. Liam was older now, taller, more curious. He carried his backpack toward the door while holding the same paper airplane that had traveled with him through so many memories. "Mom, do you think it still flies?" he asked. Claire smiled. "Let us find out." Outside, the city was waking up. People rushed to work. Cars moved through crowded streets. The world continued exactly as it always had. But for Claire, every ordinary morning felt like a reminder of how far she had come. At the Carter Foundation, her program for single parents had grown beyond expectations. Dozens of families had found new opportunities. Parents who once doubted themselves were learning new skills, finding jobs, and rebuilding their confidence. Claire never forgot what it felt like to sit on the other side. The side where every rejection felt personal. The side where asking for help felt like admitting defeat. That was why she never treated anyone like a problem to solve. She treated them like people waiting to be seen. One afternoon, Daniel invited her to a small community event organized by the foundation. It was not a luxury gathering. There were no cameras, no reporters, just families, volunteers, and children playing in the park. Claire watched Daniel move through the crowd, greeting people by name. He carried boxes of supplies himself. He listened to parents share their stories. He laughed with children who barely knew his position or wealth. They only knew him as Daniel. "You still do this yourself?" Claire said as she approached him. Daniel looked surprised. "Do what?" "Show up." He smiled. "Why would I stop?" Claire looked around at the families enjoying the afternoon. "Because most people with your success would let someone else handle everything." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he looked toward the children running across the grass. I spent many years building things that could be measured. Companies, revenue, growth. He paused. But eventually I realized the things that matter most cannot be measured that way. Claire understood. She had once measured her own life by what she lacked. Money, security, opportunities. Now she measured it differently. Moments, relationships, the people who believed in her when she struggled to believe in herself. As the event ended, Liam ran toward them holding his paper airplane. "Look," he said excitedly. It went farther than before. Daniel crouched down and examined the airplane carefully. "That is impressive." Liam smiled. "Mom says small things can travel far." Daniel looked at Claire. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They both understood the meaning behind those words. A small act on a flight. A simple conversation. A stranger choosing kindness. It had traveled farther than either of them expected. Years later, Claire would still remember that day. Not because it marked the beginning of a perfect life. There was no such thing. There were still difficult mornings. Unexpected challenges. Moments of uncertainty. But she no longer faced them believing she was alone. That was the greatest change. Daniel had not given her a new life. He had helped her recognize the strength that was already there. And Claire had given him something equally valuable. She reminded a man surrounded by success that compassion was still the greatest achievement. As the sun began to set over Chicago, Claire watched Liam throw the paper airplane one more time. It rose into the golden light before gently landing on the grass. She smiled. Some journeys begin with a single step. Some begin with a simple act of kindness. And sometimes, the smallest moment becomes the one that changes everything. Because the world does not always need someone powerful to make it better. Sometimes it only needs someone willing to care.